Hello and welcome to Into Black Archive. We are back with a brand new Doctor Who series. The first proper series, James, since 2021.
Well, that was sort of one story. So if you really want to stretch series back, we're talking about 2020, early 2020 now?
Yep, 2020.
So 4 years. The distance between an Olympic Games. We've waited for a proper Doctor Who season.
Yeah, it's all changed. We've got a new companion, a new Doctor, and some new villains, but not a new writer.
No, it's an old writer. Russell T Davies is back. I mean, we did see him obviously for the 60th anniversary specials at the end of last year, which I think it's fair to say had varying degrees of quality. Some of it really, really good. Other bits maybe not as good, but overall pretty promising episodes.
And he also did the Christmas one, which we didn't actually have a chance to cover. So let's just quickly, what did you think about the Christmas one?
I think it was in the middle. It depends how you want to view Doctor Who, to be honest. I think the musical touch was interesting. I think it worked here largely because it's a Christmas special. They usually have a bit more of a frivolous vibe to them.
It worked in the story.
Yeah, it worked in the story. I liked the way Ncuti and Millie were both introduced. I liked their chemistry from the off. I thought it was a generally decent episode. Good start between the two new leads.
I agree. It was a good start. However, I felt the end was a bit lacking, which I feel like is becoming a common theme with these new Russell D Davies stories.
Yeah, we have had this issue pop up, haven't we? Like Starbeast kind of gets wrapped in a bow really conveniently. The giggle similar, although of course it does leave some interesting questions unanswered. And this one just kind of comes to an end in a convenient way again.
It's the same with the Christmas one, and also this one which we're discussing today. It does kind of just end with a fart, quite literally.
Now, Owen, if you were relaunching Doctor Who for an international audience, this is season 1, of course. That's been the whole controversy. Season 1. It's for Disney Plus in America. What if you were introducing the new Doctor Who to people? First episode out of the gate, episode 1. What do you think it should be about?
Space babies, obviously.
Exactly, space babies.
All right, I've got a view on this. Obviously, we'll discuss some of this more next week when we discuss The Devil's Cord. But obviously, both came out at the same time, so we have admittedly watched them both. So our views are going to be slightly skewed in that. I'm going to put it to you. These are the wrong way round.
Huh? That's an interesting.
I
one.
Like for silly episodes, which Rusty Davies does have. I mean, we've had Slovenes farting all over the shot. This is not the only episode which has concluded lots of farting, which Rusty Davies has written. But I kind of feel like if it started with The Devil's Cord, it would have been a better jumping off point for people.
I agree because it directly. We will talk about this next week, but obviously because of certain things that happen in that plot, it kind of picks directly up from where we left the 60th off, and it starts to answer some of those questions. Whereas Space Babies is very much. How would I describe this? It's very much more this is here to get to know kind of the mechanics of the show.
It's a traditional one-off episode, isn't it?
Yeah,
there's no external
spaceship
forces.
in trouble narrative again. Exposition.
But I feel like before we get into the episode, though, we need to play a new game. I wonder if you want to join me on this path.
With dread, yes.
So we've all heard of Where's Wally, or for the American listeners, Where's Waldo?
Yes, hello, American listeners.
We're going to play a game, James. Where's Susan Twist? So Susan Twist is an actor which has been turning up quite a few times. We've had her in Wild Blue Yonder. We had her in the Christmas special. James, where was she in this episode?
One of the babies' voices.
No, she was more front and centre than that.
Is she the nanny?
No, some say communication's her specialty.
She's the voice of the nanny.
No, she is the communication specialist. You know when they're all signing off for their projects?
There's that little excerpt.
Yeah,
she's one of them.
Yeah, she's one of those.
Okay. So she's like the John Ratzenberger of Doctor Who now, like when John Ratzenberger has to turn up in every Pixar movie because it's a good luck charm.
Apparently so.
Apparently
Could it have
so.
wider story implications? Who knows?
With Russell, anything is literally possible, so
But,
so you never know.
yeah. Maybe she is Ruby's mum.
One to watch over the season.
Yes. Right. Now we've done that. What did you think of this episode?
In broad or in like kind of specific ways?
Let's go broadly to begin with, then we can grow those seeds.
Broadly, I think it struggles with actually emotionally engaging you. Big time.
So, I've got a theory behind this. I think this episode could only fail with its concept. There is no way to have made this story succeed with its concept.
Yeah, let's start with the concept. That's a good place to start from.
So the Doctor and Ruby, I don't want to say crash land, but it feels very sudden. They land on the sub-level of this of a spaceship where there is a monster, bogeyman, roaming around, causing terror. But on the upper levels, they go up a small little lift. There's no lift music, sadly. There is a ship ran by kids. It's my worst nightmare. I'm sure it's most people's. They are, in theory, running the ship, but they're stuck. They can't move. And they're slowly running out of options. There's only one adult on board, Nanny, who's locked herself into a cupboard as they attempt to survive and then try and get through the sub-level.
So let's just get things started from the off. Let's just rip off the plaster. The concept of this is rubbish. It feels like it came off a joke in a writing room where they went, okay, space babies, would that be fun? And everyone said, yeah, sure, why not? And then by the time they realised the joke wasn't funny, they had already invested the money and done the developments. They were kind of committed to it and they had to go through with it.
Yeah.
It just doesn't work beyond the initial, okay, these babies can talk. And from there, there's really no point to that concept.
That entire concept leads this episode to fail. Completely.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with you.
Because let's think about this episode structurally, right? This is essentially a base on the siege story in some respect.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of those in classic Who.
And even some modern Who, like the Rebel Flesh,
Impossible
Wars of
Planet.
Mars. Yeah. And going back to the moon base, the 10th planet. Now, for one thing all of these episodes do, straight out the bat, is show threat. This is normally done by killing off a random side character, but realistically, that can't be done here. Because imagine the fallout of Rusty Davies just killing a kid.
Now, there is a scene in this episode, and I'm sure that you've already watched it if you're listening to this, but there is a scene where there is a baby put in a kind of dangerous situation and there's a will they, won't they thing. But like you say, as bold as Russell is as a writer, I think killing a baby first episode into the series would have been pretty dark. So you're absolutely right.
It's not children as in like Torture of Children of Earth, where it's sort of like 13 and above.
Yeah, they're like teenagers, really.
This is basically 6-year-olds.
6-year-old, like 2-year-old.
Yeah. So in story, they're 6 years old, but yeah. But you know what I mean. It's so straight out the gate, we don't have any threat there. So instead, Russell T Davies just seems to just replace it by constantly telling us the bogeyman is scary.
Yeah, there's a lot of exposition that happens in this episode, and I think this is a fair point to say that in previous episodes of this podcast where we were covering the Chris Chibnall episodes, I would have a lot of moaning about Chris Chibnall telling and not showing. That's one of the biggest problems I have with Chibnall. And Russell never used to have that problem, at least in my head. Maybe that was nostalgia talking, because this episode is pretty much nothing but telling.
Yeah. Now, do we think this is rose-tinted dark glasses, or do we just think this is just... Because we seem to be having a lot of random issues with Rusty Davies writing.
I don't know. I think the issue with this episode, like you say, all stems from the concept not really being workable. Because when you lose that threat, they're obviously trying to replace it with this boogeyman character who they go on about, like, their scream is the perfect pitch to be scary.
It's also weird because like we know they can do horror, but still sort of make it prime time, because we saw that with Wild Blue Yonder. Like that was legitimately
That's body
freaky
horror,
at
yeah.
times. Where was that this time round? Like if you can't show us anything to get scared of, what, like with just threats, like why aren't you making it some sort of like horror fit? Instead we just constantly get random close-ups of like CCTV footage of him going ah.
It's all a bit remote, and I, in some ways, I actually think, and this might be something that comes up later as we go through this series, I think the 60th specials and the series are being made for two completely different audiences.
Yeah.
There's a real disconnect between the way Wild Blue Yonder, for example, flows, very similar setup, where it goes into body horror, and obviously there's kind of a lot of depth to that, a lot of dark questions about the Doctor's character, Donna's character. Whereas this one, it circumvents that, and it's more about kind of the novelty of the fact that there are space babies. And don't get me wrong, there's like some mentions of like a recession and things like that to kind of add some depth, but it doesn't
There
really
are
feel the same.
quite a few political moments as well. Like I don't think it's blatantly, but there is an abortion message in there somewhere. There's also quite obviously a refugee message in there as well, with how basically the entire question is basically the entire plot of this story is we need to get the kids on this space station to a planet which takes in refugees. That's basically this story. So there's quite a strong bit of politicalness going on, but it all just feels so surface level.
Yeah, I think it's added on the top to kind of give the illusion of depth. Like, when you look at a puddle and it looks really deep, but actually it's just kind of on the road. Don't get me wrong, Russell has always done this with not just Doctor Who, but loads of other shows he's done. They've always had a political subtext. This isn't new for him, but certainly a lot of it feels tacked on with this episode. It kind of feels like it's there to give the idea of a message, but in reality they bypass it because, look, space babies.
So I think moving on from the concept, let's look at the characters. This is the first time which we've seen... It's not the first time, but it's the first time we've seen them together throughout the entire episode. Because for Christmas time, it was spent with a lot of them separate. It's Ruby Sunday and this brand new Doctor. How's it working for you?
So, I think the chemistry is one of the stronger elements so far. I do think that Ncuti and Millie work together. Now, I definitely think, if we start with Ruby Sunday first, before we get into 15, I think there are two things with Ruby Sunday I want to pick out. Number one is there are a great many similarities between this episode and how they deal with Ruby to an episode called The End of the World, which is from Russell's original first season back in 2005 with Rose Tyler. And they really do. They almost like reuse shot for shot stuff from The End of the World. Like, there's a shot of them looking into space. We had that before. There's calling mum from a hacked superphone, which we had before. These are the exact same steps we went through.
I mean, straight up, in End of the World, one of the scenes is they go onto a fluing platform. The Doctor sonics away a blind, which then opens up and shows a planet underneath it. That is literally what happens here. Aside from it's not Earth, it's a colony planet, but it's the same visuals, isn't it?
It's the same ideas, and I think they're trying to set up Ruby in a similar way to Rose in that respect, kind of placing her emotionally in the story.
It's sort of Rose comes Clara, isn't it? Because
a little bit.
With Clara, we have sort of like a lot of mystery about who is she? Who's this mystery girl? At least in the beginning, it kind of got a bit more generic towards the end. But initially, it was like, who's this mystery girl who keeps turning up in space and time? But we kind of have that hit here with Ruby of who is she? Why does it keep snowing whenever she gets emotional?
There's a lot of questions around that, and those will come up, I think, more in the next episode. We can talk about those. But certainly, the other thing I notice about Ruby as a character from the writing side is that I think her growth as a companion is alarmingly fast.
What do
I
you mean
think
by that?
it's sort of like accelerated character growth. And this might be because we've only got 8 episodes in this season and previous Russell seasons had 13. So that is definitely a shortening in what you can do narratively. But we go from what's this? It's a TARDIS to here's your key in the space of 45 minutes, which is pretty quick.
It's weird. In some elements, it feels like we're speed running, but in others, it feels like it's going slow.
Yeah, it's odd, isn't it? And I think with Ruby, it's not so much that the character is learning quickly; it's that the character already knows. That's what it feels like to me, and so it doesn't feel earned, that growth. It kind of just happens.
It's much like what we've been saying about the concept. It's we're being told, not shown, her growth.
Exactly, yeah, exactly.
Because it does feel like from the offset set, she kind of just gets. Like, I'd expect this from a companion after a few episodes of the Doctor. She just instantly gets into the groove of the whole space travel thing. But she pretty much gets into the groove almost immediately.
Yeah.
Like, as soon as they see space babies, there's an initial, ooh, babies! Why do they eat them? And then we kind of just are now instantly in the groove of, this is what it is.
Yes, it's like, it's as if all the questioning aspect kind of got taken out. There's that initial 5 minutes at the top of the episode where it feels like all of those questions that the companion usually asks have been like vacuum packed into that little section. And then we're on to, okay, they know what they're doing now. And it just feels a bit too fast.
Yeah. And then the Doctor.
I think I'm liking Ncuti.
Yeah.
Or Ncuti, as they've now clarified. It is Ncuti. So the thing with the way he's playing the Doctor is, we knew about the flamboyance, we knew the energy he was going to bring from the Christmas special. That's definitely still there. That's going to be one of the big drivers of the season, one of the strongest points so far. I think that's great.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there's those hints coming through of kind of the depth, but there's more of a carefree side, and of course that's going to be related to the whole getting ripped in half thing we had a few months ago. But overall, I think he's working well for the time being. I just wish he had a better story to kind of dig into, because here he doesn't really get to do all that much.
It's both here and the next episode. We constantly just seem to be falling back on he's an orphan.
It's very much this is now the crux.
Like, well, it's weird because we never really got that with Rusty Davis' first run, even though the Doctor was an orphan. There was the space war in his head. Not space war. There was the time war in his head.
No.
But it never got mentioned. So I don't know if he's like constantly mentioning it, kind of reassure Ruby, but it just doesn't. It just feels like it's being crammed down our throats slightly.
I think it's similar to. I think the thing with The Timeless Child, which has been oft criticised, especially by me, over the past couple of years, is that it does present an opportunity for Russell to kind of give a emotional flaw to the Doctor. That's what the Time War was back in 2005. Yeah. So I think the orphan story is being used in the same way here to kind of humanize the character for a newer audience, so that there's a point of entry.
But much like what we've discussed before, it's a lot it's the same 2005 ingredients, but making a much worse dish.
Yeah, that's what it feels like at the moment. And I think what it is that Russell's trying the same formula again, but he wants to do different things with it.
Yeah.
But part of me thinks that if he wanted to do something different, he should have used different ingredients. That's currently how I'm feeling, especially in this episode. I feel like there's just not been a lot of thought into how all of this is adding up to a story, because it doesn't really feel like a story. It's incredibly basic. There's a lot of just time that feels sort of aimless in this.
This is the thing as well, which gets me, is that like when you go back and rewatch Rusty Davis and even Moffat's to some extent, we criticised Chibnall for this a little bit. There was always beefy characters for us to get into. Even though they're only left one episode, it feels like we've got good, solid characters there. But here, yes, they're babies, but we can still add some character to them. it very much felt like the baby's characters were very much skin deep, and we've got Nanny who's got a little bit more there to it, but not much else.
Yeah, Nanny's one of the stronger parts of this episode. So that's a woman called Jocelyn, who was actually the on-site accountant that's just had to become Nanny because all the other crew have walked. Which is an interesting setup. I like how that plays into the whole recession narrative because you've got, let's face it, a member of the working class, effectively, is being thrust into this situation and they're stepping up and being compassionate when maybe others wouldn't be. But the problem I then have is that beyond the kind of sense of duty, I don't get what the motivation is. I'm not sure whether that's strong enough to sustain that plot.
Mm-hmm.
And so the result is, again, like I said before, there's just a real difficulty to emotionally engage in this. I don't see where I can enter the plot and really care.
Yeah, this entire episode just feels... I said it earlier. Feels skin deep.
It feels kind of afterthought-ish. And this is kind of what I said about, like, it felt like a joke that was left on the writer's room and it kind of just ran before they could stop it.
It feels like back when we had 22 episode seasons of TV shows and they just needed to do a filler episode.
Like a bottle episode.
Not even that, just literally just a filler.
Yeah, because like there's no kind of addition to the serial arc. It's an episode that exists. There's space babies, that's a fun joke. And that's kind of it. I feel like if, obviously we had the 2 episodes on Saturday night last week. If you'd watched just the second one, you would have had the exact same level of exposition for the series.
Yeah. Which I feel like is fine mid-series, but as your series opener, for things to claw in audiences.
Well, this is the thing. It's just shockingly weak. And actually, now you've mentioned that, I want to go on to another point, which is this is obviously, I think, season 14, if we're using the new logic for us.
Series 1.
But it's series 1 now. And that's because this is a BBC/Disney Plus show now.
Yeah.
So this is series 1, pretty much for the rest of the world that hasn't discovered Doctor Who yet. And we, as fans, are saying it's difficult to care about this episode. What's that going to be like for someone who's never watched this before?
But are we just not like the target audience anymore? Because I've got a young cousin who's like primary school age.
Okay.
And this was her first bit of Doctor Who she's ever watched. And she sent me a photo and went, "Oh, I'm watching Doctor Who." I've asked her a question of, "What did you think about it?" And she went, "It's amazing. I'm loving it."
Okay. Okay, well then that's great. I do think that one of the things Russell always said, I remember years and years ago about Who, was that it needed to be a family show and they needed to be stuff for the kids. That's why when you go back and watch those Slovene episodes and there's all those fart jokes, I mean, even then you sort of think, really? But you know, kids of a certain age do like that and it does work. So we shouldn't dismiss those things because they're not necessarily for us being, in our 20s.
On the topic of how it's similar sort of things with what he's done before, and how he's previously done Slovene farting, all that stuff. If we think back to his initial season 1, people refer to it as being a season of 2 halves. You've got pre-Dalek and post-Dalek. Pre-Dalek is funny, lighter stuff, and then post-Dalek is for darker stuff. Think Boomtown and Passing of Waves.
Yeah, where it actually gets really good.
I'm hoping we get that.
Me too, but I think the difference is if I compare, let's use The End of the World as an example, because I think they're definitely taking beats from it. That's a lighter episode, but there's still a lot of depth to that.
Mm-hmm.
But there's still levels of depth there. And I think that episode is a lot more effective at telling a deeper story without losing the humour and the lightness, and I think it's balanced really well. Whereas I think with Space Babies, it leans too much into the joke, and it kind of forgets the story.
Yeah.
So I'm all for more depth. Don't get me wrong, but if we're gonna have light episodes, you still have to get the story right, and it's not an excuse to not have a good story. You should still always have a good story, and then the tone is kind of what you do after.
Yeah. So let's start floating on towards the ending. And I've kind of suggested I'm not impressed by it, and I think it's a wasted opportunity. What do you think about it?
It just sort of wraps up, doesn't it? My frustration with this episode is that it just feels like stuff happens because we've reached that time of the episode and it needs to happen. There's no real emotional build into it or anything. It just sort of happens, and that really frustrates me because I can't get into the story that way.
So what I said to you was that it's a missed opportunity. Because I think they have a perfect ending here.
What is that, actually?
Which they don't go for.
Okay. Which is?
Ruby doesn't quite make it to Nanny in time. And the Doctor can't stop the airlock from opening. And we get the emotional oomph of the Doctor realising what's just happened in front of him. He then goes to Nanny, we angle it, and we get our first big Doctor set piece speech of anger, of why have you done this? You said you'd look after all of your kids. Then we get some proper oomph in there. Where it just kind of feels like it, as you say, it just ends.
You know what? I think in most episodes, I would agree with you. But given what you said about your younger cousin really liking it, that would have felt tonally so off with the rest of how this episode went.
But I don't see then how... I think that's the big issue of this episode. I don't see how it could end and be satisfying.
Which brings you right back to the concept just being flawed. This is the problem, is that if you'd have added that ending where Doctor does another great big speech, obviously for us, we would go, oh, great, Doctor's making a speech, darkness, depth, we like that.
Yeah.
But that's not going to really work, I think, for your standard 8-year-old watching the show. It will just feel odd and a bit serious out of nowhere. So I think they ended it as they could have, but just the story and the concept were never really there to end it well.
I wish they also ended it with something slightly better than we just... we stored up your farts.
Oh yeah, that's nonsense. that's really up there with just let it go. Honestly, 5 episodes into New Russell and we've already had 2 remarkably convenient Deus Ex Machina endings?
I mean, have we had...
Even Catch might be one.
And then is it... Then, I mean, if you think about the Christmas one, Church River Road, that's literally just the Doctor pulling down and then basically skewering the Chief Goblin.
Yeah, he impales the Chief Goblin and basically explodes the ship and kills all the goblins on it. Which is interesting because then in the next episode, within the first 5 minutes, he's saying, oh, it's terrible, the genocide that happened to my people.
Yeah, it's like I said at the beginning. Has Russell forgotten how to write an end?
At the moment, I am struggling with the way episodes are ending. I do think this one is really an issue with that. But at the same time, it's not the ending necessarily. I just think the whole story's wrong and the whole concept's wrong. And it just doesn't emotionally work. I get that it's funny and I get that it's light and like it's a good way maybe to bring people into Who in a sort of light way, but I just don't get what you would stay for. That's my problem.
Do you think Rich Russell isn't being given enough restrictions?
I don't know. I think...
Like, if we think back to the first season of New Who, which I think we both like.
Yeah, I like.
That was with the prospect of the BBC constantly looking over his shoulder going, are you sure this is a good idea? Whereas now he's basically the golden child with a deal with Disney+.
It's different circumstances, but I think what's really the difference is probably money here.
Mm-hmm.
We know that Disney is pumping a lot of the money in for the show now. That does afford Doctor Who a bigger budget than they have been used to. There is definitely more budget on screen. I mean, we've got space babies with moving mouths. That requires animation. That requires potentially mo-capping. That is pricey and is not something that would happen on Doctor Who in the past. So it might just be a case of Russell's got more tools at his disposal and then is therefore able to do ideas he wouldn't have done in the past. Now, I'm not saying that means the ideas he didn't do before were bad, but it means there's less restriction he's working with, and that might lead to going for ideas that aren't as good.
So you mentioned money. I feel like we need to bring up something which happened at the start of this story, which Russell D. Davies refers to as the most expensive joke in Doctor Who history, when Ruby steps on a butterfly and becomes Rubython Blue.
Rubython Blue of the 57th Hatchlings or something like that.
Yes. I think that would be a better story, him trying to correct that.
Yes, actually. It would have been a better story trying to correct that. And actually, now you mention that and I think about it, that's a much better way of actually building the world of Doctor Who and still being quite light.
Yeah, because I mean, like, how he reversed it is such a fucking cop-out.
Well, he just drops some fucking regeneration energy on it.
Yeah.
Just like, oh yeah, there's plenty of that to go around after you bi-generated. Still plenty in the tank.
Yeah. I just feel like that joke alone is a missed opportunity.
You could have done loads with that if you think about it, because that's kind of introducing a new thing to Doctor Who. Remember when they put that out on social as a preview? And
yeah,
that kind of confused us because that's never really been the way Doctor Who works. It's not been instant timeline changes like that.
And everyone was going like, oh, how does he resolve this? How to dissolve this? And it turns out it just...
Poof. There you go, life.
This episode is basically just disappointment after disappointment, really.
It just, we've had near enough 3 years of knowing Russell was coming back for a series. That is an awfully long time to get hyped up. And maybe even it was too long, because I think by the time we've rolled around to this point, we've almost overhyped, and maybe we weren't at the peak of the mountain.
Yeah.
But to have this be the first episode of your grand spanking new relaunched series, it just feels like such a wasted opportunity. And this isn't me condemning the season and saying that Russell's hopeless all of a sudden. This is not a good episode, don't get me wrong. But, all we can hope for is better, eh?
Exactly. So, I think... Oh, one last thing to mention is that at the end of the episode, we crash bang back into Ruby's house. But that brings us to the end of this episode, I think, unless you've got anything else to say.
No, I think that's largely it. There's some snow at the end, of course. That's starting to set things up as to what the vibe is with Ruby. Obviously, it's a little bit mystical.
Yep. So, I'm going to ask this edgily because I don't think it's going to be very good. Out of 10.
There are worse episodes. I want to point this out. There are episodes that really frustrate me because they make the wrong decisions. I think the problem with this episode is that they don't necessarily do the wrong things. I just think the concept is flawed, and I don't think they really should have ever run with it. I'm going to give it a 3, which is pretty harsh, but I've given lower.
I don't know if you have.
I've given, I swear I gave the Vanquishers like a 2.
Oh, it's going down to flux levels.
It's down there with some of the worst of Flux because I just can't care about it. Like with most of Flux, I at least had an emotional in.
We were enjoying the joys of John Bishop being John Bishop.
I like John Bishop. I would have liked John Bishop in this episode, actually, now you bring it up. But that's not because of the character, it's just because I think John Bishop's funny.
Been extra charismatic force just to add something to this story.
We'll just add a bit of personality.
I just feel like even if we ignore the concept being flawed, there's just so many missed opportunities. Like, we don't see how the babies control the ship. Do they actually control the ship, or is it just nanny and automated?
Yeah,
it's just like how do they get into the chairs?
it's
there's actually one thing I want to mention as well about the ending.
Okay.
Without any context, Bogeyman goes from bad to good.
Oh yeah, that's a point. He suddenly becomes like a wolf. Awoo.
Yeah.
Beats me. Beats me why that happens. Definitely not explained.
No, nothing
Definitely
in the
not
story
explained.
is.
It's just one of those things where you're like, oh, okay.
Oh, for shippers building up with pressure, what are we going to do? We need to solve this issue for shippers building up with pressure. Oh no, it's just farts.
It's fast. It's fine. Don't get me wrong. Doctor Who is a family show, but being a kids show and being a family show are two very different things. This is too much of a kids show. It's not a family show. A family show still has a plot, even if it's got those bits in there. And this just doesn't have a developed plot. That's why I've given it a 3. What would you give it? Are you more sympathetic?
Potentially a 4 at push.
What makes you go to a 4? What's the redeeming quality gets it there?
Like, there's no substance to it, but it's fun at points. But that's about it. That's like the only and Juicy and Doctor and Ruby's relationship during it is good.
Yeah, that is a strength.
However, I feel that's more a strength for season than the episode.
Yeah. But that's what does give me hope still
Yeah.
for the other episodes, because I can tell that the two characters at the centre are working.
Yeah.
So hopefully this is just a blip.
Fingers crossed. Fingers crossed. And on that less than amazing note, we'll be moving on to The Devil's Court next week.
Yes.
So I hope you join us then as we discuss The Maestro. Bye.
Bye.